Hey, it's T. I'm one of the geniuses at Ask Zylor. So let's just get started with the live session.
Okay, so let's get started. So this is a grade 11 functions question. It deals with transformations of trig equations. So we'll just do A and B for this. So the question is saying, consider a sinusoidal function in the form a sine x minus d plus c. Write to explain how its graph will change for each change described. So A is telling us the sign of A is changed. So A will go from either positive to negative, or it'll go from negative to positive. And then our C is being increased by 2. So we need to describe how our graph is going to be changed. So our A is our vertical stretch or vertical compression, right? In terms of trig functions, the A usually denotes the amplitude, right? But if our sign is changed, what that tells me is we have a reflection. We have a reflection against our x-axis. Right, and then the C, which is we're increasing by plus 2, is we're increasing our graph by 2. In other words, in regards to trig equations, we're raising our equation of axis, equation of symmetry, our axis by 2. So if it's initially at 0, our equation of symmetry will be increased by 2. So for part B, it's saying D is increased by 3 pi over 4 and C is increased by 3. So for B, my D is increased by 3 pi over 4 and C is increased by 3. C again is talking about the equation of symmetry. So if we increase that by 3, that means our equation of symmetry will be increased by 3. That means every single value, my y values will be increased by 3. Now the D, it's saying it's increasing by 3 pi over 4. What that does is it's going to shift it left or right? But because we have a plus sign, that means we're shifting it right by 3 pi over 4. So we're shifting right by 3 pi over 4, and this one we're going up by 3. So we're going to go ahead to the next question, which is a grade 9 math. It's an area of a complex shape question. So it's asking me what is the area of the figure to the nearest square centimeter. So we're given this figure, we have to find the area of the shaded part. So the area for this will be the area of the trapezoid minus the area of the semicircle. Right? So the area for the trapezoid will be base plus the second base, right? So we'll call the short base A, the long base B. So we have A plus B over 2 times the height, which is 7. I'm going to say B is 10, so 10 plus 5 over 2 times 7, which ends up being 52.5 centimeters squared. That's my area for the trapezoid. Now, the way we find the area for the circle, we know the diameter is 5, so we know the radius. Right? So we only want half the circle. So I'm going to say half pi r squared. So then I have half times pi times my radius would be 5 over 2 squared. So when I evaluate that, I should get 9.8 centimeters squared. So now I have the area for the trapezoid and the circle. So my total area is going to be the area for the trapezoid, which is 52.5, minus the area for the semicircle, which is 9.8. So that gives me 42.7 centimeters squared. Okay, so we'll go to the next question. So this is a grade 11 functions question. So we're dealing with angles greater than 90 degrees. We're again dealing with trig. We're dealing with trig functions. So the terminal arm of the angle theta lies in quadrant 3. So if I draw, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and this is 4. So if it's in quadrant 3, it's going to look something like that. So calculate the angle, which is this. theta to the nearest degree. So we're told that the terminal lies with the equation 5x minus 2y is equal to 0. So I'm going to write 5x minus 2y is equal to 0. That's going to represent this line over here. So I'm going to isolate for my y. So my y is equal to negative 5x over negative 2. Right. So if I simplify that, I just get 5 over 2x. So my rise is 5, my run is going to be just 2. Okay, what does that tell me? That means if I were to redraw this and I draw this line, if I get a point, if I go my run of negative 2, my rise would be negative 5 as well. I'm just going to use that, my slope that I got. Right. So given that, I can find tan theta, which is just this, is equal to y over x. So tan theta would be negative 5 over negative 2. So I'm going to go ahead and find what the angle is. So it's going to be tan inverse of 5 over 2. Right? And I end up with 68.1 degrees. But that's only this angle. I'm going to call it the related acute angle. So they ask me for the principal angle. So the principal angle would end up being 180 plus my related acute angle. So I have 180 degrees plus my related acute, which is 68. So I have 180 plus 68.1 degrees. Right. So that ends up being 248 degrees. They want it for the nearest degree, so I'm just going to leave it as 248 degrees. So we're going to go ahead to the next question. So this is a grade 11 functions question again. We're talking about reciprocal trig ratios. So what are reciprocal trig ratios and how do we find the cosecant 30? So reciprocal trig ratios are, let me write the primary trig ratios down. So sine theta, cos theta, tan theta. The reciprocal essentially means I'm looking for the inverse of each of these. Right? So that means my sine ends up being 1 over sine theta, my cos ends up being 1 over cos theta, my tan ends up being 1 over tan theta. These are the reciprocal functions for my primary trig ratios. So another way of writing this exact same thing is instead of writing 1 over sine theta, I can simply say cosecant theta. This is equivalent to saying 1 over sine theta. Each of my primary trig ratios has a function that's denoted for its reciprocal. So my 1 over cos can be set as secant theta, and my 1 over tan can be set as cotangent theta. Right? It's just an easy way of saying 1 over cos theta, 1 over tan theta, and 1 over sine theta. So if we're asked what is cosecant 30, then we know that cosecant 30 is the same as 1 over sine 30. And sine 30 I should be able to get because I can use the trig, the special triangles, right? 30, 60. This is 1, 2, square root 3. Right? So the opposite of hypotenuse for sine 30 ends up being 1 over 2. So sine 30 is 1 over 2. But what they're asking for is 1 over sine 30. So what I can do is just make 1 over 2 a reciprocal. So I end up getting 2 over 1. So my cosecant 30 ends up being 2 over 1. So I can just leave it as 2. So this is once again a grade 11 functions questions. It's dealing with 2D trigonometry. So it's saying 2 spotlights, 1 blue and 1 white, are placed 6 meters apart on the ceiling in a ballroom. So let me draw that. So this is 6 meters. A stationary observer standing on the ballroom floor notices the angle of elevation is 45 degrees to the blue and 70 degrees to the white. So I'm going to say someone standing here. You can see both of them. One of them is 70. So this is blue and this is white. How far is the ceiling to the ballroom? So they're asking me to find the vertical. Right? So what we have to do is initially find what this angle is, because we can evaluate just that triangle. So we can get that angle by just doing 70 degrees minus 45 degrees. That ends up being 25. Right, so let me redraw that triangle. So this is 6, this is 25. Right. Do I know what this is? I do, because I can consider this to be alternative angle, so it's going to be the same as this. So I know this angle to be 45 degrees. So what I've done is I essentially have a pair. I have 25 degrees and 6, and then I can find out what this distance is essentially. Right? How can I do that? I can use the sine law equation. So my sine of 45 over x is equal to sine of 25 over 6. So I'm going to isolate for my x value then. I'm going to say this is x. So my x ends up being sine 45 over sine 25 times 6. So if I plug that into the calculator, I should get 10.04 meters. Okay, so what I've found is this side length. So that's 10.04 meters. So what I can do next is evaluate this triangle over here. So let me redraw that. So then I have 10.04 meters as that angle, and I know my full angle for that was 70. So the interior angle would be 90 minus 70, which is this. So 90 minus 70 would be 20 degrees. This is a right angle. So now I have a right angle triangle that I can solve. So this is my height that I need. Right. So then I should get sine of 20. Sorry, not sine. This is my hypotenuse. This is my adjacent. So I can do cos of 20 is equal to height over 10.04. So my height would end up being cos 20 times 10.04. So my height would end up being 9.48 meters. So this is a surface area and volume question. So we're asked to find the surface area and volume of a sphere of radius of 3 centimeters. Okay, so find the surface area and volume of a sphere of radius 3 centimeters. So the radius is 3. So I need to know my volume and surface area equations. So my volume equation is going to be 4 over 3 pi r cubed. So since my radius is just 3 centimeters, right, so I'm just going to plug in 3 for my radius. So 4 over 3 pi 3 cubed. So if I plug that into the equation, plug that into my calculator, I get 4 over 3. My pi is 3.14. And then 3 cubed is going to be 21. So then I end up getting 113.1 centimeter cubed. Then for my surface area, it's 4 pi r squared. So then again, I'm going to use 4 times pi times my radius as 3 centimeters, which is 4 times pi times 3 squared, which ends up being 9. So this evaluates to be 113 centimeters squared. So the volume and the surface area ends up being the exact same. So this is a grade 11 function sequences question. So we're asked to find the formula for the nth term that determines the sequence, then list the next 3 terms. So this is the sequence given to us. So it's -3, -6, -12, -24. Right, so what we should see initially is that what we're doing is multiplying and not adding a certain term. And that factor we can find by dividing the second term from the sequence from the first term, so -6 divided by -3 gives me 2. I can keep going on and finding out if the factor stays the same, so it is, because 24 divided by 12 is 2, 12 divided by 6 is 2 as well. So my factor stays the same, so that tells me I have a geometric sequence. Right, if it's a geometric sequence, I need an initial amount, which is my a value. In this case, my initial amount is 3. And I need a ratio, how much is it being increased by, and that is a factor of 2. So then for an equation, I say Tn is equal to a times r to the power of n minus 1. So then I can say Tn is equal to a, in this case is -3. My r is going to be 2 to the power of n minus 1. Right, they've given us terms 1, 2, 3, and 4. So they're asking me to find the next 3 terms, so I should be finding 5, 6, 7. So in order to find 5, 6, and 7, I'm just going to plug in 5, 6, and 7 into this equation. Right, so my T5 is going to be -48. My T6 is going to be -96, and my T7 is going to be -192. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So this is a grade 9 math question, so we're dealing with the volume of a cone. So we need to know the equation for the volume of the cone in order to solve this. So my equation is pi r squared, height divided by 3. So what's my radius? They've given me the diameter as 44 centimeters. So my radius has to be 44 divided by 2, which ends up being 22. Right? And my height they've given as 56. Actually, they haven't given the height, they've only given the side length as 56. So we need to find what the height is. Right? So we need to use the Pythagoras theorem to solve this. So we're going to draw a right angle triangle with 56. We know now this is 22. Right? And then my height is going to be 56 squared equals 22 squared plus h squared. So my h squared ends up being 56 squared minus 22 squared, and then I can square root both sides to give me my height. So my height ends up being 51.5 centimeters. So now I can plug it into my volume equation now. Right? So my radius is 22, my height is 51.5 centimeters. So then let's plug it into my volume equation. Pi times 22 squared times 51.5 over 3. So that ends up being 26,101 centimeter cubed. So let's move on to the next question. So this is a grade 10 math question. So we're told a committee is choosing a site for a country fair. The site needs to be located the same distance from 2 main towns in the county. On a map, these towns have a coordinate 310, 13,4. Determine an equation for the line that shows all the possible sites for the fair. So let's draw a general idea of what's happening. So 310 would be somewhere here, 13,4 would be somewhere here. Right. So they're choosing a site and it needs to be located at the same distance from both these 2 towns. Right. So if we draw a straight line between these 2 points, right, where the midpoint in that line segment would be equal distance from each of the 2 towns, right? But if we were to draw a perpendicular line along that midpoint, at any point in that line, the distance between the 2 towns would be the same. Okay, so how do we go ahead and find that? So first we need to do is find the midpoint between these 2 points, right? This point over here. So I can use the midpoint equation. So my midpoint is equal to xy. When I add the x's together, divided by 2, add the y's together, divided by 2. Right? So my x's are 3 and 13, divide that by 2. My y's are 10 and 4, divide that by 2. Right? So I have 16 over 2 and then 14 over 2, which ends up being just 8 over 7. So this is my midpoint. Right? Now we need to find a perpendicular line from that midpoint to that line given. Right? So let's find the slope between those 2 points. So my slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So my y2 I'll say is 10 minus 4, and my x2 I'll say is 3 minus 13. That ends up being negative, I get 6 over negative 10, so I get negative 6 over 10. So to get a perpendicular line, this simplifies to negative 3 over 5, right? To get a perpendicular line to this slope, I need to get the negative reciprocal, right? So my perpendicular slope would be 5 over 3, and it ends up being a positive, right? Again, we need a negative reciprocal. So now we're going to use the slope, and we're going to come up with an equation. So we're going to say y over 3x plus b. This is the equation that's going to be equidistant from both the 2 towns, but I need to find my b value or my y-intercept, right? So what I can plug into this equation to get my b value would be my midpoint, which is 8 and 7. That's the only point on the line that I know. So I'm going to substitute my x and y. I have 7 for my y, and I have 8 for my x to give me my b value. So my b ends up being 8 times 5 over 3, which is 40 over 3. Bring that to the other side, so I have negative 19 over 3. So my equation ends up being 5 over 3x, negative 19 over 3. Right? So once again, I'm just going to draw a rough sketch. We had 2 towns. We had 3 and 10, and we had 13 and 4. Right? We needed to find the midpoint between these 2 points and find the perpendicular line along that midpoint, because any point along that perpendicular line, if we choose, is going to be equal distance from both the towns. So this is a grade 12 calculus and vectors question. It's saying determine the tangent of y is equal to e to the power x at a point when y is equal to 2. So this is an exponential function. So the tangent of y is equal to ex at a point, we need to find the derivative for this function. So y is e of x. So y prime is going to be the same, because ex is a special function where the derivative of that is going to be the same as the initial function, which is just e to the power of x. Right? We're told to find determine the tangent of y is equal to ex at a point when y is equal to 2. So we know what the y is, so y is equal to 2, so we need to find the x, so I'm going to say y is equal to e to the x, so 2 is equal to e to the x. I need to find out what x is, right? So I need to take the ln of both sides, so ln 2 is equal to ln ex, which just gives me x, so I have ln 2 is equal to x. So ln 2 and 2, I need to find the tangent, right? So I found the derivative, so what I'm going to do is plug in my x value, which is ln of 2. So e to the power of ln 2 is just going to simplify to 2. So my tangent ends up being just 2. So the equation of the line would be, okay, so if we were to find the y equals mx plus b formula, my slope ends up being y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Right? So my slope in this case is 2. So I can do x2 minus x1 is equal to y2 minus y1. Right, and my initial point x1, y1 is ln 2 and 2. So that's what I'm going to plug into this equation. So I have 2x2 minus x1 is ln 2 is equal to y2 is, I'm just going to leave it as y2, and y1 is just minus 2. Right? If I expand this, I get 2x minus 2 ln 2 is equal to y minus 2. I'm just going to replace the 2's with like x2 and y2 with just x's and y's. So I'm going to isolate for my y. So y is equal to 2x minus 2 ln 2 plus 2. Okay, so that about does it for me today. So just a quick update, the next lab will be on Wednesday at 8 p.m. So thank you again for tuning in. Hope this has been helpful. Once again, if you have any math questions you want any help with, send us a message. We'll be happy to help you out. This has been T from Ask Zylor. Hope you have a good night.